appropriate to just say at the outside edge of that brick line, perhaps?
Yeah, we can certainly, I think I understand. can certainly take a seat and answer questions from the staff table and look into some documents and try and respond to any of your questions that you have. We do have a motion prepared for the Planning Commission. If the Planning Commission moves to adopt a resolution making the changes, the recommended changes, the item would move on to City Council. It would be introduced, first reading of the ordinance, and it would require a second reading of the ordinance. And then after that, it would go into effect 30 days thereafter. So that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa.
My only question is, do you, as far as the sidewalk space and the dining, is staff still recommending 4 feet? Or does staff have strong feelings about, I mean, it seems like eventually we may be talking about 4 feet versus 5'2". And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, my only thought would be is I would like to kind of look at some of the other blocks and just see what, the reality is in the field and see if they're similar. The whole intent for the regulation is to provide that pedestrian clearance. The minimum required, according to our public works staff, for accessibility is 4 feet. So that would be the minimum. We could go to a higher level if, for example, the research done in the field provides for that anyway. But at minimum, but I guess what we're trying to say is that at 6 feet would really make it a little bit prohibitive, especially if the minimum is 4. So we have some room to work in. And I suppose if we didn't want to bring this back, the Planning Commission could frame the recommendation in such a way that directed staff to evaluate and then maybe perhaps direct staff or make a recommendation not to consider anything less than X or whatever type of direction you would like to give staff so that we can take that forward to the City Council.
Any other questions for Lisa at this point before I let the public comment? Okay, great. Thank you. Now I'd like to open it up for public comment. And Kate Fickle, can you please come forward? Thank you so much for being here.
So this is my first time to present to all of you. So I apologize if I don't get the protocol right.
Oh,
so,
it's okay.
But good evening. I heard her say Chair and Commissioner, so I'll say Chair and Commissioners. My name is Kate Fickle, and my husband Jerry Carroll, and I own 501 Brigado, which is a parcel in the light industrial, the IL district, that's affected by the minimum lot size proposal. And we're very happy to see that the city is focused on improving the commercial viability of San Carlos. But in our opinion, this proposal does not go far enough. Today, our industrial areas are riddled with rundown buildings that were, in fact, once used for industrial purposes. But there is no market demand now for space for industrial purposes. The only tenants that are interested in renting in San Carlos our industrial space are looking for a bargain in terms of cost per square foot. So we see businesses, storage businesses, parking. Our property is currently has parking as its primary use, and commercial recreation. The rates that we can get for these kinds of tenants, speaking perhaps more broadly, we're members of the Harbor Industrial Association. These rates do not allow any of us to replace our very old buildings. Our buildings are 65 years old, and we would love to replace them, but we can't do that when restricted to this industrial definition. We've recently fielded visits from developers interested in building large office buildings on our property, but this is prohibited by zoning regulations today and puts us at a disadvantage relative to other communities on the peninsula. We would like to see the city open its zoning regulations to allow for more innovative space usage in the current industrial districts. This might include commercial, office, or multi-use developments. In our view, this is how San Carlos will attract high-value businesses to the city and improve the quality of life for its residents. Just increasing the minimum lot size alone will not accomplish this goal. So that was the input we wanted to provide.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Seeing no other comment cards for public comment, I'd like to go ahead and move on to Commissioner questions and comments. Sure.
Close public hearing, so moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Oh, hold on.
Well, I don't know how to achieve, I mean, I don't know that we'd want to, but I don't know how we would achieve if we wanted to what she is asking for. And I don't know whether I can do you know, Al, Mr. Savay, do you know what she wants? And I don't mean to talk to you about you in the third person, but before we close the public hearing, I didn't know if we needed to get more input from her. Do you understand what it is that she's asking for?
I think, and perhaps I could paraphrase that, Madam Chair and members of the commission, and if not, we could clarify.
Okay.
But what I think I heard is, aside from the lot size issue that's before the commission this evening, there's an issue or a question about the flexibility of the uses that would be permitted in that zone.
Sounds like-
And I thought I heard that the speaker was interested in more flexibility for offices, perhaps other types of commercial uses, and had cited, other types of uses that weren't really up to the standard of, new office buildings and that kind of thing. And I would concur that is what is happening in our industrial zone. I would concur with the speaker that what we've seen is, because of the old buildings, because of the difficulty with assemblage of these parcels, there's no incentive for folks to upgrade the buildings, and so the lease or the rents are very low, and so you have businesses that come into the industrial areas that aren't, from an economic development standpoint at least, aren't the most desirable for the community. So I think that's what I heard.
Okay.
Thank you.
But does that give us any recourse?
Oh, and Madam Chair, if I can add to that, there is flexibility in the code to allow for those types of uses. For instance, in the light industrial zone, and perhaps Lisa can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you can have office buildings in the light industrial zone with a use permit. So there is the flexibility. However, it does require you to go through, a process to get there. So we have built in a fair amount of flexibility into that zoning category, and we can talk about that. And that I think is open to the commission. Didn't we talk about uses earlier in the process? In the same process, we could certainly revisit and just talk a little bit about that. But you already visited that earlier in this process.
Great.
So was the speaker, may I ask the speaker a question?
Yeah, we haven't closed public.
So were you aware that a minor use permit was an option for some additional use, that you could get additional uses with a use permit? Were you aware of that, and was that, okay, okay.
I don't know if it's a minor, it
think
might
it's
be
a conditional
conditional.
use.
It's a regular.
Did I say minor? I was stuck on cottage food.
Yes.
I meant conditional use. But I assume your answer doesn't change, that you weren't aware that you could seek a conditional use permit to obtain some additional uses? Okay.
Yeah, it's a conditional use permit.
And what's allowed with a conditional use permit?
Business and professional offices, medical and dental, essentially business and professional offices right here.
And large-scale commercial entertainment and recreation,
Yeah.
small scale?
Already come.
There's a whole list of things that are
And that's
permitted,
IL.
and minor use permits and conditional use permits.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can actually do it with a conditional use permit.
It is a lengthier process, but it is allowed.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. Why don't we go ahead and,
You want to call the question on the?
yeah.
On the vote?
On the public comment, yeah. So I'm sorry, forgive me. So we just had a motion to close the public hearing, and I heard a second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. And thank you very much for coming. Now, at this point, I'd like to hear Commissioner comments deliberation.
Should we do one at a time?
Yeah.
On one, I mean, I started that, and I'm totally fine with a minor use permit. It makes a lot of sense. So that's what I would be.
For the parkage
But I sort of
flexibility.
like the idea of limiting the minor use permit for when there would be additional visitors instead of when it was for the, in totality. That she's, Lisa had spoke about how other areas actually use the minor use permit only when having to do with visitors to the site versus just a single employee. I like that flexibility.
So basically, you would only want a minor use permit when there were customers coming, not when they had an employee?
Yeah, it wouldn't apply to the employee. The employee would be allowed by right.
But only one, is it only one employee is allowed under the
You're
ordinance?
only allowed to have one employee, so it's
Yeah,
like
that's
having
fine.
one visitor to your house at any
But
given
if you had
time.
someone-
That shouldn't have a huge impact on any parking anywhere.
Well, I mean, I'm fine with that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that-
Fine with that. too.
Okay.
Okay.
So we would make that adjustment for one.
The only question I would ask out of this is there some way 6 months, a year after this is done, that you could come back to us with just some idea about how it's working? Are there complaints? I know with a minor use permit, it would actually go to the zoning administrator but I would like to sort of have us sort of know down the road whether it's working or whether there's a series of complaints, and we may need to address that.
Certainly, Commissioner Marsters, we'd be happy to do that. And just to clarify, we just talked about the direction for what would require a minor use permit. But in terms of the parking, was the commission satisfied with staff addressing that through the findings and conditions of approval? Or,
I think that's what everybody
Yeah.
was saying, yes.
Can I ask one more question?
You
out of
said you
that?
only had one.
Okay.
You can't, if you say you
On
have
that,
one, you can't.
I have one more.
Go ahead, Scott.
When somebody applies, can you look at the number of vehicles they have and the number of parking spaces they have in order to make a judgment of whether it's going to have an impact or not? Is that part of your process?
yes, that would be something part of our requirements in terms of the application submittal, all the material and information that's needed in order for staff to evaluate and make a recommendation to the zoning administrator.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on item 1? Okay, item 2, brick demarcation. From our previous question session, we were talking about the brick demarcation, the 4 feet, and also whether it had, what would be the impact, I think, beyond the 800 block of Laurel. So having said that, that would make me think, because if the sidewalks are thinner on past the 800 block of Laurel, maybe keeping it at the 4-foot ADA compliance would be the best.
Well, are they?
I don't
I guess
know.
that's the question. Is it?
Can we do a walk?
Or,
Or have someone do a walk?
Well, I think that, I don't know about you guys, they brought this to us, this is the third time.
Oh,
If there
third
was,
time,
if there was a
okay.
way for us to get done today, what if we said that it was always gonna be 4 feet? It was gonna be between 4 feet and 5'2", and it would be, I guess it's what, 4'8" is to the sidewalk line. It would be 4'8" as long as that left, left at least 4 feet, right?
The-
Would that do it? I mean, it has to be at least 4 feet, and it could be as
long as there's 4 feet
as long
remaining.
as there has to be 4 feet for pedestrians under all circumstances, and assuming there are 4 feet for pedestrians, at least 4 feet for pedestrians, the business can go out as far as 4'8". Wouldn't that take care of it?
would that take care of it?
It should take care of it. I don't know if it
I
would.
think So I'm sorry, I'm
Should
just
and would are
processing
two
it
different
through.
things.
Generally, that sounds pretty good at this point.
Should, would, that sounds good, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the 4-foot thing is the most important. And so I think that establishing the 4-foot right-of-way for the pedestrian ADA access is the most important thing. And then I think going from there, but we really don't know about some of the sidewalks in the central and south portions
Right.
of Laurel. And quite honestly, we've never gotten complaints about sidewalk cafe issues down there. We've always talked about downtown San Carlos Avenue and in the first 3 blocks there. So this is sort of out of the area that we're a little bit comfortable with, but I think
Right.
that if you said 4 feet, that would be fine. If you were comfortable just saying you have to have at least 4 feet, period, that's it, at this point.
Okay. And I get the sense, Scott, that you want a little bit more unless the sidewalk is narrow.
One of the issues I have with 4 feet, even anywhere, is that that can be interpreted to include the sort of the edge of the curb. So there's usually a 6-inch
Inch edge.
edge to
Right.
the curb, and if people start saying 4 feet and they start including the edge of the curb, then you essentially are looking at 3.5 feet, and
So is there a word for
Well-
that setback? Is there a word for that 6 inches? Is it called?
From the back of the curb
do
line,
at
we could
least-
do that.
You could do at
From the
least
curb
4
line
feet.
back.
Inches.
Curb line.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
curb
The curb
line. Yeah, and we could actually provide a graphic illustration of what you're talking about in the zoning code. We found that that's the best way to
Yeah,
go.
that's a great way of
It's
doing
very
it.
helpful.
Yeah.
So once you do that, we'll have a drawing of it in the code.
Yeah, and it would go curb line back.
Yeah. And we'll show that it's the back of the curb, not out to the edge of the curb.
If you do that, you're opening up the restaurants in the downtown to use another foot or so of the existing sidewalk.
Well,
Beyond the
can-
brick
they can use a
demarcation.
Brick
foot.
path.
Foot's not
Actually,
gonna really get
you're
them
giving them
anything.
8 inches, potentially 8 inches.
Yeah, a foot's not gonna get them anything, really. So I did a little homework too about, because I frequent a lot of restaurants around here.
Yeah.
And
I think we should just
most
say
of those
it's to the edge of here.
tables out there are what they call 4-top tables. And so I was trying to figure out what's the largest 4-top table that you could possibly have out there. And 48 inches is the longest 4-top table that you could have. It's a rectangular table. Most of them have seats on either side. They're not coming out onto the sidewalk, where the pedestrians walk. So I think we're probably overanalyzing this a little bit, because if you go up and down the streets, besides maybe one restaurant that is a little over that line right now, only because they ordered not regulation size tables,
Yeah.
every other restaurant is well within that line currently in the 600, 700, and 800 block.
Okay.
Tables.
The tables.
The tables. That doesn't necessarily mean that chairs don't occasionally back out into the 4-foot.
Yeah, I mean, that's an enforcement issue, but I think at this point right now they're laid out that way. I mean, occasionally they may have a chair that comes out sticking out when it shouldn't be there, but so that's an enforcement issue. But I think we have plenty of with the, what do we say, 5.2 or
Yeah, 5'2".
I think that's more than enough space for the restaurateurs to be able to fit within that realm and still have the clearance.
I can't believe I'm belaboring this, but I think the concern is if we say, I think Scott would be fine if we said 5'2".
Right.
Yeah.
That's
And
not
that would
the
be
issue.
fine for everything other than the unknown area, where that might only leave 3 feet.
Would we
I was
just
even
make
saying-
this
I was
applicable
saying-
to 6, 7, 800?
I was trying to make it
Laurel?
easy and say 5 feet, okay? But I think that the problem.
But they're getting an encroachment permit anyways, right? So every situation's looked at individually anyways.
But the problem is that it's not enforced right now. And so part of this is, and that's another thing that I want to say is, maybe what we need to do is we need to take a year and we need to, have the enforcement go out over the course of the year and just inform the restaurants that their violation of their encroachment permit. Not that we're necessarily going to do anything this year, but that we need to inform them that they are continually in violation and that if they continue to do that, they may need, that they may not get their permit the following year.
I think
Okay?
if we are doing updates and clarifications, then we do actually need to attempt to be clear. And then, so I would agree with the need to do it, even though it is kind of belaboring a point. My suspicion is that a lot of people are going over the line, not realizing
Yeah.
that they are. This might be our opportunity as a, this might be our learning opportunity or our teachable moment for the businesses as well, if we can get this clear.
I know that using the property line is not ideal because it varies from property to property, but maybe we just need to say 4 foot 8 inches from the property line and at least 4 foot 6 from the curb. Would that take care of it?
That seems, see, I like that better too. I tend to like, I know,
But what happens in a
like-
situation where there's not that amount of distance
So-
on the street?
What
Period.
if,
Well, then
we
they,
don't-
they would have, either they
we
couldn't
are
go
only
chairs
talking
or-
Laurel, correct?
can I make
Yeah.
a suggestion?
commercial
And that is
zone is a
that we
zoning.
go from
Yeah,
6
okay.
feet to 5 feet.
So it's
You're really
And that we-
perseverating around the 5 feet, and it doesn't achieve the goal that you originally wanted, which was to use the bricks as a demarcation line. I mean, there's
Yeah.
the 5 feet, what's the magic
Well-
with the
Hold
5
on,
feet?
quick,
What-
quickly, I do have a question.
long as it's
Is this
behind the
only
bricks, it
applicable
does.
to Laurel?
Well, we were just looking at the zoning map and the downtown, as we know it, which it's historically been referred to as the historic retail core of the downtown.
Right.
Which is the first 3 blocks plus the blocks, 1 block in either direction on San Carlos
Right.
Avenue. That's what we are talking about. And that has its own zoning designation as mixed use it's downtown commercial downtown core. And so, and also, if you talk to the chamber and you talk to the businesses down there, they know that that brick line is the demarcation line.
Yeah.
So I think that if we just keep it within that core area and we're very clear that, hey, you can go to the edge of the bricks, the outside edge of the brick, that's it, in whatever length that is in that zoning district, we're fine. Then with the rest of Laurel Street,
Yeah, they're
it's
under
a totally
different
different, totally different situation because again, we don't have that demarcation line built into the infrastructure.
But the outdoor dining
see your point.
ordinance doesn't actually designate that it's the downtown core. So would we need to modify the definition of where we're talking about in outdoor dining?
So would we want to clarify and put the mixed-use downtown core designation
Designation.
to this?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, you want to be specific about the bricks in the downtown
Yeah.
core and what your measurements are there. Now, once we get outside that area, that's where we get into,
Other
yeah. And so we may need to do a little more research and look at some of those blocks. Again, the 4 feet would apply in those blocks. Yeah, at least 4 feet of ADA behind the curb line as we discussed. So that may be a way to apply it this evening. Otherwise, we'd need to bring that back to
Right.
you at a future meeting.
No.
right. I think that makes
that-
So we
sense,
have
that
two
we just add the mixed-use downtown core designation to this and make it the outside brick demarcation line.
And 4 feet anywhere else anywhere else that has restaurants, so that you meet that ADA minimum accessible.
I'm fine with that.
Okay? Good. Okay.
Okay, all right. Item 3, minimum lot sizes. Any comments, questions, or concerns from the Planning Commission on minimum lot sizes? Okay, so I'm taking it then that we agree with the staff recommendation on item 3 without conversation.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Item 4 is background on 4 stories analysis. I know we have had conversation on this at both of our prior meetings on this topic. Do we have any other conversation to add at this point, given the background?
So the,
Thank you very much.
when I was talking about, you know, making it 3 stories and not 4 stories, I wasn't talking about the first 2 items that were put up there. I was really looking at the multi-use neighborhood or the mixed-use neighborhood designation.
Yeah, you were talking MUN.
MUN. And what I was trying to do was to look at that from a practical point of view and say, every single one of these essentially backs up to a single-family home. And as we dealt with the project that came forward on Laurel, in the 900 block of Laurel, we came to the realization that maybe 4-story buildings aren't going to fit in there quite as easily as the zoning map might suggest. And so the question is, do we want to consider maybe making a recommendation to the city council that that be lowered to 3 stories? And when you look at the MUN, there are a few locations where you have parcels that don't necessarily back up, but the vast majority of them do actually back up to single-family homes. And so, you know, that's all I was suggesting was, is that something, do we want to deal with angry neighbors at every single time one of
we
these
have it.
parcels? Or do we want to think about realistically, is this something that we want to reconsider?
Right.
They're angry at 3 stories too.
Yeah, but they're more angry at 4 stories.
Well, I think it was a valid point in bringing it up. We have had parcels come to us, and if we're realistically not going to approve them at 4 feet, are we making people's lives harder? On the other hand, in that conversation, you guys can correct me if I'm not remembering this correctly. Al, I also think that you said that there was a value to having the higher requirement and working our way down from an economic point of view. Am I saying that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So I think my sense is then to go ahead and keep it, but I do think it was a valid point of conversation because it will be something that we will continue to address. But I'd like to hear what your guys' comments would be on that issue.
I don't have a problem with it staying as it is. I mean, it's worked so far. I mean, it's reduced from 4 stories to 3 stories, and we
It is a
don't
process.
have to approve 4 stories, and we haven't. With the except, well, in the MUN we haven't.
Right.
The one across the street was not
That-
MUN, right?
right.
That was a different zoning.
Right.
But we've approved 3 stories, and you know, maybe there may be some magical one where 4 stories would work. I tend to doubt it, but I mean, let it work its way out would be my view.
But what you do is you give an indication to a developer that they can build a 4-story building there.
That's what was my concern what kind of signals are we still sending to developers if they come in here with a plan and all that time and money they've spent on a 4-story approval when we're just going to say, no, it's got to be 3? Is that fair to the developers?
Well, and I think that certainly was the question point that was brought up at the previous meetings, and I think the point that Al brought up, which resonated really well with me, was that it also gives the neighbors a bargaining chip that they could have done 4. We've reduced it to 3. Would we be setting a different standard if it's already 3? Would we then only be approving 2? I guess would be kind of my thought process. But I see your point too, and that's exactly why I think it was worth discussing bringing it up in the first place. Al, do you have any comments on that?
Sure, Madam Chair. What we do is every developer comes to the city staff and talks to the staff about what's realistic. And so we try to manage expectations before
At the staff
you see a
level.
project.
Okay.
And so we're frank with developers, applicants about what has been achieved in the past and what some of the issues were, what neighborhood has what concerns. So, I would agree that, maybe there is just one magical location where there's a fourth story that works, but we would be quite frank with developers in that, this is a very serious issue for the community. But at least the flexibility is there, and the economics are potentially there. So I think it is something that gets worked through the process. And, I think having that flexibility is maybe more desirable. By the time it gets to the commission, you may see a third story. It's more likely that you will see that.
Okay.
And through the chair, one additional piece of information is not only does the four-story need to be stepped back from the story below, but there's also a much greater rear yard setback requirement, which if MUN district is not adjacent to RS, they can have a zero lot line. But when they are adjacent to a single-family neighborhood, you may recall that the rear setback needs to come back 30 feet.
Right.
So that's another requirement.
Thank you.
I think Scott wanted to say
Yeah.
something.
I'm just thinking back to the project that we actually approved on Laurel Street, and I think there was actually fairly little landscaping in the back. There was a 10-foot landscaping.
Tree. There's a huge tree back there.
There was a huge, yeah, but the area that wasn't encompassed by the tree was just some small trees and things, and we were sort of pushed towards,
Cork
Adding-
oak.
yeah.
It was a deciduous cork oak. To be,
And I just wonder if in the future, when we see projects like that, that we can highlight that sort of landscaping as a really important piece of the project prior to it arriving to us.
I think we could do
Scott makes me feel insecure because he likes trees even more than I do, and I don't really know how to deal with that.
I'd examine that further.
I'm probably not gonna be able to sleep tonight. Thanks, Scott.
Oh, good.
Well, having said all that, then I think we've come to at least a basic consensus on number 4 and keeping it with staff recommendation. So moving on to item 5, reduce parking in mixed-use districts. This was more of a question discussion item, but does anybody have any deliberation on this, or is everybody comfortable with staff's recommendation?
I'm going to make a comment that these standards are so inconsistent with my experience, and I hate them. But this is the last time. I am not going to ask to change them. I'm not going to mention it again. I really am not in a position to disagree with experts,
Right.
which is my problem. It's not intuitive. I think that somewhere in between the old standard and the new standard is actually more consistent with my experience. Like, I could totally see 1.5 with a studio and 1.5 with a one-bedroom, maybe even 1.5 with a two-bedroom, but like with a three-bedroom. I would love to see some more, but I can't I'm not a parking expert.
Right.
It's just so not intuitive to me. And now that I have kvetched and gotten it off my chest.
How do you spell kvetched?
Well, you can spell it in a lot of different ways. It is a Yiddish word, transliterated, spelled normally with Hebrew letters, but I would say KVETCH for the minutes, if you want to include that in the minutes.
So I'm going to ask you a question. If you were to modify the parking requirements, how would you modify them?
I think as I mentioned before, and I really, in my heart, I want this, but I wouldn't vote for it even if someone else someone else made the motion, just because, again, my principle is, if there's someone who's truly an expert, and I think we had like 3 experts in this particular instance, I'm not going to be, go out on my own. But, like I indicated before, I think, 1.5, in my experience, 1.5 for a studio and 1 bedroom is more realistic. 2 bedrooms, I mean, I guess I can see 1.5. And then for 3 bedrooms, probably 2. I mean, that is more consistent with what, in my just anecdotal experience, seems more realistic in today's world. But again, I'm done with this. I'm not going to mention it again.
Any other comments or concerns about item 5?
My primary issue is, as it always is more of the commercial aspect of it, the non-residential, because I know we have that requirement, whereas if it's under 1,500 square feet, they're not meeting any really parking requirement for commercial. And it looks like it was recommended. I guess I'm wondering how that all happened.
The
You're
commercial
talking about the
reduction?
division thing, right? With that project, they
Well,
they avoided the
that's
parking
an
requirements
example
by.
of how you
Yeah.
kind of get around certain things. But, we talk about what's in zoning and what's written down and what's logical. And logical is no matter what use that commercial is going to be, even if we use the most liberal of standards of parking, it's going to be commercial, and there's going to be people going to it, and there's going to be possibly more people going to it if it's a restaurant use. If it's an office use, probably less. But we're not having any parking requirement for it under 1,500 square feet. That's the requirement, right? I just want to.
Yes, that's correct, Commissioner Gutierrez. The zoning code basically has language in it that says for certain types of uses, and I can go to the page in just a minute, but it's not any uses, but certain types of uses can take that provision of providing no parking if the commercial space or the non-residential space is 1,500 square feet or less. However, the zoning ordinance does contemplate, multiple spaces of such size, and says that when you reach a certain point of having 4 uses, individual spaces, that the parking requirement is triggered. So you can't, in a development, do 4 and then not provide any. So I believe it allows you up to 4 spaces, 4 individual 1,500 square foot spaces that would have, certain operators.
But realistically, there's not a parcel that I can think of that you could get 6,000 square feet of commercial below with. I mean, that would make it work, right? Do you,
Parking space.
I mean, it. So again, we're going back to logic. Like I know what it says, but I don't know where that would ever be triggered off unless you're talking about a culmination of a lot of parcels to be able to build something that big.
Right, and the operator would have a couple choices. I mean, they would need to figure out a way to provide those spaces on site. They can come up with a shared parking arrangement. If they're within the parking assessment district, they can pay in lieu fees, which then go towards a fund to, obtain and construct, shared public parking facilities. We do have a parking assessment district in the city. It's rather small. We're thinking that it could be enlarged. And once, those funds are received, that's the intent of using them for publicly shared parking, which could be in the form, of a garage. I mean, I think the way that it works in the mixed-use district, again, these are only for the mixed-use district, is that it contemplates all the different flexibility and different options for addressing parking in the downtown while trying to maintain that, tightly knit, downtown fabric, the continuous, block of buildings to line the street and create a public space. The street being a public space, a very, well-loved space that, people visit and walk upon. So I think the code contemplates a balance in that, while, certain types of developments of certain size are going to need to provide that parking. But certainly the smaller developments, it would be very difficult for them to provide, each one of those to provide parking on their own small lots, throughout the downtown. And I think that the concern is noted, and it's discussed in the staff report that, we went through a process and took a real recent look at the parking occupancy rates downtown. And it's one of the council's strategic objectives to start implementing some of the recommendations from that plan. So staff is going to be moving forward with a consultant to come up with some recommendations to the council for implementation for improving downtown parking environment, with managing the parking resources that we have, and better, informing the public of additional parking that is available also in the downtown core that they may not know about, such as the Samtrans building.
So I think to add to that, I mean, from a logic standpoint, I would agree to you. It's kind of like, well, wait a minute, you're, putting in retail space without people, a place for people to park. On the other hand, these small retail spaces, we won't see them and we won't get them if we require parking for them. If we require the landowner to pay for that parking, because the economics, it doesn't pencil out because of the expense. I mean, it's like $25,000, $30,000, let's say, or more, to do one of those underground spaces that we see in these mixed-use development projects. And so if we want retail diversity in our downtown and a mix of, retail, restaurants, service uses, and we want to continue to encourage the vibrancy, that's the trade-off that at the private level, we're kind of incentivizing the retail diversity that we have. Otherwise, we're not going to have it, and we won't see the change. And we're not the only city to do it this way. So I think what we have come to the conclusion is, at least this far, is that we're a city that provides public parking, that the lion's share of our parking for our downtown district is public. And there may be some problems with that. There are issues there that we need to work out. And I think as a city, we are moving forward in the direction of trying to solve some of the problems and actually providing more parking in the future. And so that's kind of how our community is doing that tightrope balancing act with what we want, the vibrancy we want to achieve, and our logic about the economics of parking.
One of the ABAG recommendations is consider parking meters. Is that something that's even being considered or not?
It's not. Parking
Good.
meters is
Okay.
not being considered at all.
Good.
It's
good.
not?
Well, no, I'm glad. I mean, I saw that. I was wondering,
Did you hear that, San
I
Carlos?
just want to
It's not being
reiterate that
considered.
fact.
Make that clear. Speak loudly.
Say that loudly. Yeah.
Survey is that we recommend that the city council put in meters. Is that what?
No, not. I want to be clear on that.
All right, at
You're
Mr.
not
Survey's
the plan-
recommendation,
Let's get Al's direct number on record now.
So I can see us leaving the parking the way it is. But I'm wondering if, as part of the parking study and the recommendations, one of the things that you're considering is sort of either requiring parking spaces or some sort of in lieu fee, which would be a smaller impact, but could be used towards creating more public parking for the downtown, so that whereas you can sort of get out of this by going under 1,500 feet, but you now, instead of just getting a free ride and not having to provide a parking space, you would have to kick in some
At least a little bit.
determinate some amount of money, which would now go into a pool to provide additional parking. Is that something that you're sort of thinking about?
Yes, absolutely. And the fact is that this parking in lieu fee idea is already built into our ordinance. However, it hasn't been used and implemented in many, many years, so it's sort of fallen to the wayside. And there's maybe not the will to, restart that. You really have to restart that idea in the community. Interestingly, when I was in the city of Mountain View redoing the downtown plan there, I looked to the city of San Carlos for this innovative idea of parking in lieu. and recommended that to the Planning Commission and City Council, and it was adopted there in the city of Mountain View, and they started to implement that idea of collecting fees for partial payment of these parking spaces, and that was then put into downtown parking maintenance and even the creation of a parking structure later. So that's a good way to do it, and that'll be one of the things that we'll explore with our city council.
Was Wheeler Plaza supposed to address some of the parking?
Yes, so there's 187 parking spaces in the Wheeler Plaza parking area now, and we're proposing to build a brand-new parking structure there with 2 floors of public parking free. That would be 237 spaces, so that's a surplus of 50 spaces beyond what we have now. So that'll help in that area.
Great.
So, are you ready for a motion?
Almost.
Yeah.
So, but that was pretty much, I feel like we're on consensus with item 5, that we would leave it the way it is, but obviously hope that our downtown parking study and our council address it in other ways. I do have one more thing before we make a motion. I really apologize for being this girl that brings things up at the 11th hour. And I want to say that it didn't occur to me until I talked to my neighbor on Wednesday and then spoke with Lisa on Thursday. If this is not the appropriate time or place to bring this up, I am absolutely fine waiting till we revisit this in 6-8 months or a year. However, the extending of the radius of the noticing requirements was something that was brought up by my neighbor, and I know it is something that we had tossed around previously, and since we are looking at clarifications and cleanups and improvements, I did think that I should bring it up. I know that in at least most of our commercial properties, it's a 300-foot radius. I want to say in RDRC it's 150. Is it 150? And I'm wondering if there's some value to making all of it 300 or to making the radius bigger if it's on a hill district or something that triggers some more challenges like that. I understand this can have fiscal impacts and how much it costs to mail these notices, and I'm absolutely okay if the city's not prepared to give me an answer, but I wanted to see what you guys thought about that before we closed this topic.
So specifically for RDRC?
Whether at least that was my thinking, was making it 300 for just to make it kind of that's the number we notice at. Though, I mean, there could be some argument for making the commercial stuff radius larger too. I've just noticed that in our deliberations, we have had people complain about the limited noticing radius, and I thought I'd bring it up at this point.
I don't remember anyone ever complaining about the limited radius. I remember them complaining about not getting the notice.
Yeah.
But I don't remember anyone ever claiming that they weren't on the list to get the notice. And I just may not remember it. It seems like they were usually on the list, they just claimed, or they didn't get it, or they claimed not to get it. Do you actually remember, and you've been on the commission longer than I have, and obviously you have too. Did
I
sometime
think there was the Crestview,
I say I'm up in Crestview, and
Specifically, I'm
Crestview
thinking
right now is,
Crestview was an
Actually-
issue where,
Yep.
where
yeah.
The other issue that's been is in sort of areas of transition between 2 different
Districts.
districts. The 300 a lot of times won't necessarily hit the other district, but it will still have an impact on the individuals, and especially, again, single-family homes that seem to be the complaints that we get, is that something as big is going in, but they're not notified because they're just outside that 300.
Right. And I
What
do
radius?
think, just to be fair, I know that even if we extend it, we're going to get the people then that are at
301,
305.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
I completely understand and
Yep.
have thought about
But-
that little Pandora's box myself. But because it is something that we've seen, and then I know particularly those of us that have served on the RDRC have definitely seen, I thought it was something that I would bring up now. And I guess my question would be, Do you have any idea what the fiscal impact would be to the city to increase that radius, and how much of a pain would this be for you guys?
It's a cost to the applicant.
Yeah.
I think we would need
Okay.
to raise the fee,
Okay.
for that.
Okay,
And,
so that's a concern,
it
too.
is more work. It's something we're used to doing, however. It is more difficult and a little bit more of a challenge to do it. And I guess you can imagine that the rationale for the residential side of things is the lots are typically closer together. So you actually, with 150 feet, with a 40-foot wide lot or something, you would get more people in that
Right.
sphere. And also, after, when you're talking about a two-story single-family residence, it's more difficult to see after a certain distance. But
Right.
I think you brought up a good point about the hillside component of it, that, maybe someone in the distance, may see it in a hillside area more. So that's the rationale behind it.
And I do know, I noticed from the zoning ordinance that the director can deem a larger radius if necessary, if they see a project coming in, that the director can make that determination. So again, I'm not married to increasing the radius. I did think it was something worth discussing, though.
I think the 150 feet is actually a little small for residential, to be honest with you. I personally think 300 is a more reasonable amount of square footage or area to cover on residential. This is my personal opinion.
And again, I think particularly from Crestview, I was thinking the ones that were down slope. And of course, if you go 150 feet, you're only really hitting part of the slope. And yet, those residents had some particular concerns about the degradation of the hill and some other issues. Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
So is it 150 for residential and 300 for anything non-residential?
From my
I'm just trying to understand
understanding.
what the.
To
what-
clarify through the chair and
Yeah.
to the commissioners, the 150-foot radius applies to projects that go to the RDRC. For any project that might have a design review component, but that is coming to the planning commission, say for a grading and dirt haul permit, and that's,
interesting.
so
Okay.
any project that comes before the planning commission is going to be required to notice 300 feet. And the public notice fee is 300. When projects go before the planning commission, not only do we do mailing, but we do a publication as well, which accounts for the $300 public notice fee. With RDRC, the notices are mailed and there's no fee to the applicant. It's just 150 feet. We mail those out, it's done. With the planning commission, there's the additional step of posting in the newspaper and collecting the $300 fee.
What if something is appealed from the RDRC to the Planning Commission? Does that trigger a new mailing?
That would be correct, right?
Okay.
Because it's coming before the planning commission.
Okay, well,
then
I
maybe
think
that-
that's different. I
maybe
mean, if
that's
it's coming,
that then.
if it's expanded if it comes to the planning commission, then I'm more comfortable with that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's that. Then particularly, that might just be some education on my part to my neighbors about that. Does anybody have any other comments on this? And again, sorry to bring it up at the 11th hour.
I have one more, I have a question, an unrelated question. On grandfathering, this might sound a little silly, but on grandfathering, I know it applies to a current owner, but does that apply once property sold? Okay,
Correct, because it applies to the property.
okay, stays with the property, okay.
And Scott, did you have one more?
And my, hopefully last one, unless I think of something in the next 5 minutes.
We'll have made a motion by then.
So one of the things that I wrote down under the sidewalks and everything were umbrellas and umbrella holders, and the umbrella stands. And I'm just reading, it says vertical clearance of 7 feet shall be maintained. There's not a single umbrella in the downtown right now that's 7 feet. Every single one of them is 6 feet. And probably the worst offender is Starbucks on the corner of Laurel and San Carlos Avenue. And the size of the stands that they have, they jut well out into the walkway. And there's a lot of times when they'll take the umbrellas out and just leave the stands sitting there and they become tripping hazards. And so if that could be conveyed to them, as well as anybody else who has umbrellas downtown, that they need to be 7-foot umbrellas and not 6-foot umbrellas, because I see a lot of people kind of ducking around them, and they also angle them so that they're out into the 4-foot walking area. So if that can be part of the education,
Part of the learning opportunity.
yes, then that would make things nicer for people walking downtown.
I'd agree. Okay. All right. Then just to kind of summarize, so we are fine with not changing the radius noticing requirements. Thank you guys for at least entertaining my thoughts on that. And I believe we've come to consensus on everything else. So I would love it if somebody would make a motion.
So I'm prepared to make a motion. Would you like me in the motion to include the changes or choices that we made with respect to items 1 and 2?
I don't think it's necessary. Both Al and I took notes so we understand the intent of the commission. We could reflect that in the record as part of the minutes,
Okay.
so
Well,
that you don't have to read through it all. But you can amend the motion to note that with direction given to staff regarding the sidewalks, and the other one was
Cottage food.
Cottage food.
correct. Exactly.
Cottage food, minor use permitting. So then I move that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending the City Council introduce an ordinance to amend Title 18 zoning of the San Carlos Municipal Code based on the findings incorporated into the resolution and for the reasons stated in the staff report, modified by the direction of the Planning Commission at tonight's meeting with respect to minor use permits for cottage food operations and the brick demarcation line in the mixed-use downtown core area.
May I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Great. Thank you, guys. All right. Moving on to our next items, reports, correspondence, and general information. Item A, report on recent city council actions.
No updates for tonight, Chair.
Okay. Planning Commission comments or reports.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I went to the Planning Commission training a while back that Lisa talked about, and one of the things that they had mentioned that I think that we could consider is at a semi-regular basis, let's say once every 6 months, once a year, or once a quarter, whatever makes sense to us, that we visit completed projects, so we could see basically, what it is we've done and if it still makes sense in the context of what we're doing. So I'd like to throw that out there for consideration, that we do visit what we've improved.
It's a great idea.
I think that's a terrific idea.
Road trip.
Thank you, Shannon. Any other comments or reports from the
They
commission?
bring the mountain to Muhammad. But okay.
Anybody else? Okay. Correspondence. I don't see anything on the dais. Okay. And then finally, planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects.
Quick report for the commissioners tonight. The next regularly scheduled Planning Commission hearing of June 2nd will be canceled. We don't have any items that are ready to come before the commission, so that meeting will be canceled. But we do contemplate a Planning Commission hearing on June 16th. In addition, on the 16th, we will most probably have on the agenda, I think it's already time, to elect a new Planning Commission chair and vice chair, and also confirm the Planning Commission liaison to the RDRC. So we'll be doing that before the end of the month in June. And that concludes my updates.
Have we heard anything on the Transit Village?
Well, so at the last city council meeting last Monday night, one of the issues that was brought forward to the city council at the request of the council was to reconsider the issue of shuttles and the location of the shuttles. During the review process for the project, as you will recall, that was an issue. And the council moved to move the shuttles, the Caltrain, all shuttles over to the west side of the depot. What we understood is that, and what we heard from Samtrans, Caltrain, is that that was a significant issue for their board. And in addition to some concerns with regard to the density that was finally approved for the project. And we had also heard that there's potential that the project would not move forward unless there was reconsideration of that particular issue,
The shuttle or the density?
the shuttle.
Okay.
Density was not an issue that was brought forward or wanted to be reconsidered by the council. So staff brought forward a recommendation to the city council at the last meeting to move the shuttles back based on our analysis, and also mitigations that could potentially be put in place to mitigate some of the concerns and issues that the residents had on the east side. The city council voted to move the shuttles then back to the east side, but that Samtrans and the east side residents meet to talk about potential mitigations to mitigate their concerns. As a result of that, and after some of the initial conversations with Samtrans and Caltrain, we believe that we're hopeful and cautiously optimistic that the project will now move forward, but it still has to go to their board for final determination.
And has Legacy said that they're still signed on for the lower density?
Yeah, they can do the project, and they've come forward to us with conceptual ideas about how they would handle that and do that. And so they're still on board.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. All right. I would like to adjourn this meeting at 8:45. Thank you, everybody.